Welcome to another Fiction Kitchen, and this month we're taking the train all the way across the continent to District 12, where despite the desperate conditions, the more fortunate citizens can relax and take a break with a goat cheese and apple tart. This tart originally comes to us from Peeta Mellark's family bakery, and is recreated during the deadly games of the first book during a moment of respite between Peeta and Katniss. The Mellark family bakery probably made this tart full-size, using a tart dish, but you and I are going to cheat a little, using these easy, pre-frozen pastry puff shells. To start, preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll want to let it sit for a bit to make sure it's fully up to temperature. When it is, break apart your pastry shells and spread them out on a piece of parchment paper on a cookie sheet. Bake these for about 18 minutes. You'll want to check and make sure that you can see the bottom layers of the pastry puff are starting to puff up too. While the dough is cooking, we're going to prep the apple slices. These are green Granny Smith apples. I like how the tartness complements the flavor of the goat cheese, but you can use a Honeycrisp apple as well. Completely peel the apple, then slice it into quarters and remove the core. At this point, you'll want to slice the apple into thin slices. You can use a mandolin if you have one, or just a sharp knife. I'm bagging up these slices to stick back into the fridge until I need them. If you want to reduce the amount of browning, which happens naturally as the inside of the apple touches air, you can coat your slices in a small bit of lemon juice. The next thing we can make while we wait for our pastry to rise is some honey butter. For this, all you need is 1 tablespoon of butter and 2 tablespoons of honey. Melt them together in the microwave for about 20 seconds, or as soon as you see the butter starting to melt. Then finish mixing it with a small spoon or fork. This needs to cool a bit, so I'll set it aside for now. By this point, your pastry shells should have puffed up, so go ahead and take them out of the oven, but leave the oven on. With a fork or a knife, remove the center top bit of each shell, and you'll see that the inside has turned into a cavity ready for filling. Carefully remove each of the tops, and the thin layer of uncooked dough that you see inside of each shell, and set them to the side. You can finish cooking these raw scraps later, and they'll make a great small snack. Remember, in District 12 we can afford no food waste. While the shells finish cooling, let's prepare our goat cheese mixture. Before I go any further, I need to make a confession. Friends, I am not usually a fan of cheese. Shocking, I know. But when I started this recipe, I figured I'd have to just suck it up and pretend to love this overly cheesy dish. No need, it is truly delicious. Goat cheese might be a bit more expensive at the grocery store than other types of cheeses, but if you can get your hands on it, this cheese is well worth the investment. For this pastry, you can use the cheese as is, or you can add 2 tablespoons of lemon juice and 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar for a cheese that's rich and creamy and oh so good. Whatever you use, heat the cheese up in the microwave for about 30 seconds. It won't melt, but it'll be enough to give this cheese an almost buttercream texture, making it easier to spread in our dough. Using a fork or a spoon, add a bit of cheese to each one of the pastry shells. If I were to make this again, I'd probably add a little bit less cheese than you see me using here. The extra cheese can be eaten with the extra pastry dough we saved from earlier. Then on top of your cheese, add your apple slices. You can try to add whole slices, or cut them up smaller to fit inside of the shells. I probably should have added more apple than you see me add here. I was just so excited about the goat cheese, but my pastries turned out a bit cheese heavy. The wonderful thing about this dessert is the blending of the cheese and fruit flavors. Before we add this back into the oven to finish, we're going to brush the tops with some of that honey butter from earlier. Use a pastry brush if you can, and brush over the tops of the apples and the pastry dough. If you've ever used an egg wash on a pastry before to make the dough nice and golden, the butter here is performing the same function, while the honey gives the dough a nice sweet flavor. Pop those back in the oven for another 10 minutes or so, enough time for the honey to crystallize and the apples to bake. Be careful handling these pastries afterwards, and set them out to cool for a few minutes. You can eat them while they're still warm, or cool them down to room temperature, and they'll last in the refrigerator for a few days, or in the freezer for up to a month. But don't wait that long. These goat cheese and apple tarts are so good, you'll want to polish them off right away. And since you've made them yourself, you deserve to reap the rewards. Thanks for watching along, makers. We'll see you again next month.